We have been talking about the gods of this world, the little g's, the modern idols that men hold in their hearts and give first priority in their lives. We remember that Paul said in Romans chapter 6, "Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves as servants to obey, his servants ye are, to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness." We know that in Colossians 3:5 and Ephesians 5:5, that covetousness is called idolatry. And we talked in our last lesson about money and how it can be a god to us, and it can be our modern idol. Today we want to talk about a different modern idol, and I think this is one that many people have stumbled over, that many people have bowed down before, that many people have made sacrifices to. This lesson is still a supplement for when we're unable to meet on Wednesday nights, and it's done with a view toward Wednesday, the 22nd of July. Of course, you may be watching this at any time, and you're welcome. We appreciate you watching this. But today we're going to talk about this God of pleasure and entertainment, this idol that men have, where they want to be entertained, they want to be pleased, they want to experience pleasure so badly that they will do things that are not right, involve themselves with things that are immoral, that they will sacrifice their spiritual values in order to be pleased. So let's talk about what this God of entertainment or pleasure can cause us to do when we bow down to worship him. For some, it causes them to change the worship that God has commanded of us. We remember John chapter 4 and verse 24, where Jesus said, "God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." And we all have a basic understanding of that verse, I think, but so many people forget that the foundation of that verse is the idea that God is the audience in worship. We're worshiping him. We're not there to please self. We're not there for our entertainment. We are there to worship God. Listen to this psalm, the 96th psalm, as it describes the beauty of worshiping God. Verse 1 says, "O sing unto the Lord a new song. Sing unto the Lord all ye earth. Sing unto the Lord, bless his name. Show forth his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the heathen, his wonders among all people. For the Lord is great and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols. But the Lord made the heavens. Honor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. Give unto the Lord, O ye kindreds of the people. Give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due unto his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts." Verse 9 says, "O worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Fear before him all the earth. Say among the heathen that the Lord reigneth. The world also shall be established, that it shall not be moved. He shall judge the people righteously. Let the heavens rejoice, and let the earth be glad. Let the sea roar, and the people and the fullness thereof." Verse 12, "Let the field be joyful, and all that is therein. Then shall all the trees of the wood rejoice before the Lord, for he cometh. For he cometh to judge the earth. He shall judge the world with righteousness, and the people with his truth." We never ought to confuse the simple, joyous adoration of God, falling down before him to kiss toward him, to kiss his hand, to raise up his person in our minds and in our hearts and give him the glory that is due to his name. We need to never confuse that simple act of praising and honoring God with the hype and emotionalism of candlelight and mood music and the testimonies of men and all of the things that men have devised, the ways they want to worship God. When we do it the way we want to do it, we're not truly worshiping God, because God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. John 17:17, Jesus said, sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. To worship God in truth is worship according to his word. And he has never left the pattern for worship up to man. From the time of Cain and Abel on down, he has given man a pattern for how to worship him. And those that fail to worship according to that pattern are not praising him. They may be trying to please someone else. They may be trying to please self, or as the modern trend is, they may just be seeking to be entertained, but they're not worshiping God. We have to be careful not to exchange vocal music that is authorized by God, the singing of intelligible, beautiful songs, for things that are more pleasant to our ears and more entertaining to us. In Ephesians 5 and verse 19, we read, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. The music that we are supposed to make, that the New Testament clearly commands and authorizes, is that music of the heart. Singing with grace in our hearts, singing and making music or making melody in our hearts to the Lord. And we remember that right after Colossians 3:16, we read Colossians 3:17. And whatsoever you do, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Organ grinding, piano pounding, guitar strumming, and drum beating music are what some people want because it entertains them, because it brings them pleasure. But instruments, mechanical instruments of music, are not authorized in worship to God. They were clearly commanded in the Old Testament. Look at Psalms 150 and other passages. But they were clearly left out of the New Testament. But one of the major reasons that people turn to these mechanical instruments of music, if they're honest, they say, I like it. It sounds good to me. It brings me pleasure. It's such a pretty thing. The question is not, does it please us, but does it please God? And when we devote ourselves to pleasing ourselves, we're bowing down before that idol of our own pleasure and entertainment. We must not exchange our congregational singing, which is authorized by God, that we sing to one another, that we teach and admonish one another, that we are speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, that we must not exchange that which God has authorized, that congregational singing, for trained or professional singing groups, solos and quartets and choirs that sound better to our ears. Some people's idea is let the good singers sing and everyone else just sit and be quiet. But that is not fulfilling God's command to teach and admonish one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. You say, what the people singing are teaching and admonishing us. Yes, but we're not teaching and admonishing them. We're not fulfilling that command or obeying that command. There's another area of worship where people have bowed down to the God of entertainment and pleasure rather than following the New Testament pattern. We must be careful not to give up the preaching of the word for skits and plays and stunts. 2 Timothy 4 and verse 2, preach the word. Be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. God didn't authorize us to act out his word instead of preaching it. And we have to be careful not to change the intensity of the prophet for the flair of the showman. I remember a gospel preacher that came to our congregation when I was a boy. And every night he had a different colored suit jacket. They were pastel colors of different kinds. And the discussion was, what color jacket am I going to wear tomorrow night? What color jacket is the preacher going to show up in? Changing the true preaching of the word for stunts, for the flair of the showman, speaks to our desire for entertainment and pleasure. So we must be careful not to bow down before the God of entertainment and pleasure by altering what God has authorized for us in worship to him. But there's another thing that we need to think about under this heading of the God of entertainment, the idol of pleasure, and that's that it has caused some to neglect the purity of mind that God desires for his people. I realize this is difficult in a modern world. We live in an R-rated world. We live in an X-rated world. Let's just face it. So many of the things on the television, on the sitcoms, the things that they say, the humor that they go for, when I was a child would have only been spoken in a locker room somewhere where you didn't want the teacher to hear you because they were considered dirty jokes. It's hard to have purity of mind, purity of heart. And yet Jesus said in the Beatitudes, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And it's sometimes hard to weigh these things out because the ratings that they give to movies and so forth don't always mean what you would think they would mean. There are times when there are PG-13 movies that are less objectionable for a Christian than some PG movies. There is violence. There is just watching the Super Bowl. How many commercials feature people that are undressed or sexual innuendo and things like that? We need to remember that watching pornography is wrong. We need to remember what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 28, when he said, I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Today's billboards and primetime commercials would have been pornography 50 years ago. Why are they not still considered pornography today by Christian people? Are they less pornographic today just because the world's standards have changed? We are assaulted daily, our minds and our hearts, and it's likely to get worse. We are like Lot living in wicked Sodom. Remember that in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 and 8, it talked about how Lot vexed his righteous soul from day to day by living among those people. Truly, our souls are vexed by that which we see around us. And yet we need to not forget who is supposed to be upon the throne of our hearts. And we don't want to sacrifice that purity of mind just to be entertained. We need to be careful about the movies that we select, the television shows that we watch. Proverbs 4, verses 23 through 27, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Put away from thee a froward mouth, and perverse lips put far from thee. Let thine eyes look right on, and let thine eyelids look straight before thee. Ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand nor to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. When I travel to Africa, In the place where I go, there is a song that they sometimes sing, and I was delighted to learn it in the Chitonga language because it's a song that I grew up singing. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little mouth, what you say. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. Those three principles are all stated here clearly right after he says, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. We have to we have to put away from us a froward mouth and perverse lips. And we have to let our eyes look right on. We have to be careful where our feet take us. We have to make an effort to keep our hearts and our minds as pure as possible and not let our desire for pleasure and entertainment drag our minds into the gutter. The fact that we hear vile speech at work is not an excuse for inviting it into our own living rooms for our children to hear. I don't know for sure who wrote this, and I wouldn't read it as an endorsement of him anyway, but I thought it was pretty good. It's called Uncle T. You probably have heard it. But it says it was a strange day when Uncle T came to live with us. He didn't get around too much, so we just kind of propped him up in the corner. But even though he didn't move around much, he sure could talk. He could show you things that would make you laugh, cry, and scream with fright. He was always ready to brighten your day. Sometimes he was a nuisance. He would repeat things again and again as if we were light in the head and just couldn't get it. Uncle T was full of stories. He taught us how to fight, how to dance, how to use guns and high explosives. His stories about sex really got dirty sometimes. He would talk about wine and whiskey and beer as if he thought this type of beverage would be really good for us. Once he took us on a tour of the Jack Daniels place. I think he must have known him personally. Sometimes Uncle T would embarrass Mother in front of us by using language that we thought was pure cussing. But he never apologized, and Father seldom cut him off or contradicted him. In fact, Father was captivated by Uncle T's knowledge of world affairs. Uncle T would contradict himself at times, but Father didn't seem to care. Uncle T became our household prophet. Many of our habits changed after he arrived. We stopped going out to visit others or playing dominoes or Scrabble or Monopoly. We even started missing church services. I never thought Mother and Father would ever allow any of us to do anything like that. On Sundays, he would preach us a half dozen sermons, and that made us feel better and kind of religious. We could just stay at home and be believers. It was hard to get a fix on what Uncle T thought. He was both good and bad, right and wrong, and sometimes real nice and other times rude. He could work math and in the same hour show you how to steal and pick pockets. He would sweep us up to the pinnacle of some majestic mountaintop and then turn around and show us the dirt, filth, and sin of Skid Row. I guess he was the greatest teacher I ever knew, and he could sell snowballs to Eskimos. Uncle T was not his real name. T was just his first initial. His other initial was V. I was reading the Bible the other day, and I ran across this scripture. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. Of course, that's from Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. In that story about Uncle T, about what television did to the purity of the modern American family, could be magnified as we talk about the internet and what's available on their handheld phones to our children and the dangers. And we must not allow our pursuit of pleasure, our pursuit of entertainment to drag us into the gutter. Whether it's video games, books that we read, movies that we go to, things that we watch on our televisions, or the things that we allow into our minds through the internet. We need to not sacrifice purity of mind for entertainment. One more area that we need to mention and think about, and that is that some, because of the God of entertainment and pleasure, that modern idol, have neglected their spiritual lives, the spiritual things of life. There are those that are never seriously minded. For some, all of life is a party. Romans 12 and verse 3 says, "For I say, through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith." Soberly. Now, there's more than one Greek word that is translated sober in the scriptures, and one of them means free from the influence of intoxicants, and is a clear injunction against Christians participating in social drinking. But that's not this word here. This word is the idea of serious minded. And those who are totally dedicated to their own pleasure, dedicated to their own entertainment, are not serious minded. Parties are good. Hobbies are good. Family activities are good. Sports is good. Leisure is good. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 31, Jesus took his disciples aside because they had no leisure, not so much as to eat. But spiritual things are better than any good things that we do for our fun. And the inability to prioritize between good things endangers the souls of many, many people. Amos 6, verses 1 through 6 says, "Woe to them that are at ease in Zion and trust in the mountain of Samaria, which are named chief of the nations, to whom the house of Israel came. Pass ye to Calneh and see, and from thence go ye to Hamath the great. Then go down to Gath of the Philistines. Be they better than these kingdoms, or their border greater than your border? Ye that put far away the evil day, and cause the seat of violence to come near, that lie upon beds of ivory, and stretch themselves upon their couches, and eat lambs out of the flock, and calves out of the midst of the stall, that chant to the sound of the viol, and invent to themselves instruments of music like David, that drink wine in bowls, and anoint themselves with the chief ointments, but they are not grieved for the affliction of Joseph." Verse 5, some have used to teach against instrumental music, and I don't believe that's what the passage is about. I do believe that the New Testament does not authorize instrumental music, but this passage is about those who seek pleasure, leisure at the expense of spiritual things. They weren't concerned about the affliction of Joseph, about the sin that was going on around them. They weren't serious minded. They were dedicated to the pleasure of laying on beds of ivory, of stretching themselves on their couches and eating lambs out of the flock. We can be hedonistic. We can give ourselves over to the pleasures of this world, eating and drinking, for tomorrow we die. But if we bow down before that God, give pleasure and entertainment first place in our lives, He will not be able to save us in the final day. Because an idol is nothing. Only the God of heaven can save. And it's our place to serve Him. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments. For this is the whole duty of man, Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13, and then verse 14. For God shall bring every work into judgment, with every secret thing, whether it be good or evil. We need to be careful not to neglect the spiritual things of this life for our own pleasure, our own entertainment. Thank you for tuning in.